Hello there, this is Coco. I'm here to talk about Sargon of Akkad's kind of poor attempt at dismantling the alt-right by attacking what he thinks is fundamentally an anti-reasonist position. He basically refers to a particular book, which I have read, but it's not a very compelling case. Often what I find in this kind of subgenre or theme of book is what atheists like to do, especially Anglo-atheists I've noticed, is they just attack and pour into both Kant and Nietzsche, and often their claim is exactly what he did claim. They're enemies of reason, and they are what led up to Nazism. It's just a very silly thing. The claim is basically that Kant wanted to justify God, therefore he had to kill reason. Absolutely ridiculous. So, in the same fashion, makers of the modern mind, on the chapter on Kant. As sense of knowledge is affected by the knower, according to Kant, so too is thinking. The empirical method of science, as he analyzed it, is not the mere obtaining of one fact after another as Hume would have it, that perhaps the way babies or idiots would amass information, but instead, the scientist applies a priori rational principles to his empirical investigation. These principles are independent of experience, and their use is what makes the scientist's subject truly a science. In the preface to the second edition of the Critique, Kant uses this simile to state his position. Reason, holding in one hand its principles, according to which alone concordant phenomena can be admitted as laws of nature, and in the other the experiment which it has devised according to these principles, must approach nature in order to be taught by it, but not in the character of a pupil who agrees to everything the master likes, but as an appointed judge, who compels the witness to answer the questions which he himself proposes. Transcendental reason, therefore, imposes its rules on matter, and matter must conform to these rules. It must answer the questions reason asks. Thus, while Kant limits knowledge to the matter of experience, he has the human mind control the experience. It's no longer the passive receptacle Locke has made it, where the realist insists that the mind must conform itself to outside reality. Kant has the mind mold this reality according to reason's own rules out of empirical facts. All knowledge for Kant is therefore partly objective and partly subjective, or more properly, at the same time both thoroughly objective and thoroughly subjective. These rules by which the mind operates are the famous Kantian categories, which are not derived from experience but rather make it. The mind is not a pupil which learns whichever experience would teach it, but a judge who tells experience what questions it wants answered. The experience determines the answers, but the nature of the human mind determines the questions. In this way, then, empirical knowledge is partly independent of the knower and is still partly affected by him in terms of what he does learn. Kant has indeed destroyed the age-old distinction between object and subject by making all knowledge at once subjective and objective. The very knowing of a thing destroys its objectivity in the older sense of the word, so although Kant insisted he was not a subjectivist, he would have to admit he's not an objective realist as Aristotle or St. Thomas claimed to be. We can even see from this very criticism of Kant that he's not some person who just throws reason out the window. What he's doing is he's giving humans, well, not humans, he's giving persons, he's giving rational beings, as he would put it, a will. He's giving them the ability to understand the world by experiencing the world how they choose to, not in some subjective way like as a black transsexual blah blah blah. No, he's saying I choose what's important to me to go out and find. I go and I create my own understanding of the world by my own interests. And you even have said before, Sargon, you've said before that men are slaves to their passions. So which is it? Are we not subjects, slaves to our passions who determine what questions we go to seek answered, or are we just the complete opposite of what Kant is postulating here, and we have no will to determine what we want answered and how we want to formulate it into our own lives and experiences? But let's not hear a third party. Why don't we listen to Kant himself? From one of the final chapters, concerning the interest attached to the ideas... I'm sorry, that's the wrong chapter. It's the previous chapter in the third section. Freedom must be presupposed as a property of the will of all rational beings. It's not enough to ascribe freedom to our will on whatever ground if we have not also sufficient reason for attributing it to all rational beings. For insomuch as morality serves a law for us only insofar as we are rational beings, it must also be valid for all rational beings. And since morality must be derived solely from the property of freedom, one must show that freedom is also the property of the will of all rational beings. It is not enough to prove freedom from certain alleged experiences of human nature, such as a proof is indeed absolutely impossible, and so freedom can be proved only a priori. Rather, one must show that freedom belongs universally to the activity of rational beings endowed with a will. For Kant, a rational being is very important. It's not the case, as you claimed in your response to Nazi commenters, that Kant creates, and thus, by an extension, Nazism creates and believes in an irrational man, as it were. It is incredibly determinate on man being, as Kant puts it, a rational being. The very notion of freedom, it relies on rational beings. Without rational beings, there can be no freedom, and vice versa, according to Kant himself. But this isn't about Kant. Kant was the very beginning of it and one of the roots, and that's why people are bringing him up in this person's attack on the alt-right. But it is instead about empiricism, romanticism, and rationalism. So, instead of referring to Kant, who's not in the alt-right, why don't we actually come to someone who was after Kant, in particular 1997, which is long before you made your accusation. So it's not so much that some Nazi, as you put them, is coming and saying, alright, well, Sargon's right, we need to go back to pure reason and, be enlightenment, milady, liberals. This was written in 1997, Archaeofuturism. In the tragic world that is emerging, radical and ideological... I'm sorry, you can't even see it. I'm reading on a tablet. I'm sorry, I don't have all physical books. I need to have some digital books for the sake of space and ease of access. In the tragic world that is emerging, radical and ideological effective thought must combine the virtues of Cartesian classicism, the principles of reason, actual possibility, permanent examination, and critical voluntarism, and romanticism, a dazzling thought appealing to emotion and aesthetics along with daring perspectives, in such a way as to unite the virtues of the idealist philosophy of affirmation with the critical philosophy of negation through coincidentia I took 5 semesters of Latin, but I can barely even read it. Coincidentia apparentium, coincidence of opposites, as Marx and Nietzsche did with their methods based on the hermeneutics of suspicion, i.e. the indictment of ruling ideas, and the positive reversal of values. Thought of this kind, which combines daring and pragmatism, intuitive forecasting and watchful realism, aesthetic creativity, and the will to historical power, must be a concrete and voluntaristic way of thinking capable of creating order. Now, yes, it's true. There are some people who are idiots. There are some people who will accept a kind of purely romanticized idea of abandoning reason and everything like this. There are also people within this movement who are complete LARPers, and although they have no true faith in pagan gods, just believe it's their duty to their duty to act as if they do so because it's a form of tradition. No, it's blind reasoning, and not blind reasoning, it's just blind emotional garbage. The alt-right is not based on just pure romanticist ideal. We're not relativists in such that we believe white people see the world a different way. What we are racial realists. We believe that that group is different than that group. Therefore, when they create their own society that reflects their own personal values and other biological necessities, that group is going to form that society. And that group will form that society. And that society and that society will be completely different. They may share some fundamental aspects due to us both inhabiting the same objective reality, us both having to adhere to physics, but at the same time, if one group values something a lot more, such as, let's say, they value security over freedom, and that group doesn't value security whatsoever and values freedom even more, then that group is going to have a much more militaristic society. They're going to have a bigger society in terms of public ownership, etc. While that society of Ancapistan will have a lot more reliance on self-defense and instead focus more on complete freedom, market economies, etc., etc. It's not so much that it's a right and wrong. You can't. The problem is when people say Nazis believe they're superior. No, we're not superior. That would be a completely. It would be as you want to put it, a Anglo-chauvinist perspective. It's not so much that we believe we're the best people. We believe that we are the best us. It's so much that Germans will create the best society for Germans, Anglos will create the best society for Anglos, Africans for Africans, and so on and so on. Now, people will come in and they will say, nonsense. Colonialism was great for Africa. You even said colonialism is great for Africa. And looking at it from our perspectives, yes, we made a society that was better for us, that we enjoyed more. Therefore, we apply our values of what makes a good society to them. But yet, you know what? They still rebelled. They still didn't like it. They still hate it. They still, until this day, view it as one of the worst things that ever happened to them. The same way, if an alien society came and abolished your Anglo-Enlightenment liberal haven on your little island, and instead impose a totalitarian system where people live for however long they want, but they don't get to vote, and the aliens basically rule everything in a benevolent dictatorship. You would hate it. The material conditions would be great. The material conditions in this hypothetical would be limitless. It'd be the best situation you could possibly imagine, but yet you would hate it. You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't have representation. You wouldn't have self-determination. That's what self-determination means. It means every single people, you can apply it to individuals or not. I disagree with individual self-determination because it's just a simple fact that, whether you want to apply it from a metaphysical and naturalistic stance to a more religious side, from the religious side, there's sin in the world, therefore people aren't always going to know what's best for them. And on the naturalistic and materialistic side, people don't have complete information. They may make the best choices according to their thing, but they're still going to fall to temptation. There's still going to be people who choose to do drugs and everything. As a general rule, yeah, people are going to do what's best for them in the long term. However, as you like to put it, you can't judge any individuals based on statistics, which is absolutely one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. But that's regardless of the point. The point is, If Jamal wants to have a society that we hate, but Jamal absolutely loves, then it's not up to us to go in and enforce a Sargon society that Jamal is going to hate, but Sargon says, well, you should love this. You should care about such and such. And so often you even come to this very notion. We say that our people have a right to exist, and as you said in your most thing, you don't care. You don't care if white people exist. It's just a funny notion to say, I don't care if white people are, butchered in the street, as long as every white individual is fine. However you want to come to that, it's just such a silly thing, viewing everyone as individuals without any relation to one another. A man can gain everything in the world, but if that world is empty, he loses nearly all meaning. Sure, he has some value, but most of his value is gone. True value and true power comes from serving others and responsibility. You don't have any true power unless you are acting from duty and responsibility of something. And likewise, if you just give yourself everything, what value is it? What use is it? It has none. Only from serving others do you truly gain value. And again, you don't so many times you harp back to, this is like the Christian right. Meanwhile, just some Christian person sitting out a log cabin, and he just kind of looks up and just somewhere in the world, someone is hating me for some reason. The Christian right died 100 years ago. Some idiots came forward and said, we're the true Christians, and you said, you know what, we better believe them. We better believe them so we can not believe. You looked at creationists instead of going to the Bible and saying, no, you're completely wrong, this is what the actual sources say. You're just sure, we can ignore the sources and just claim you're the one true sect. You do the opposite for Islam, funny enough. Anyway, the claim of relativism is not true. We're not cultural relativists or anything like that. We're just simply basing what society should be based on what values the people in the society hold. And what values people in the society hold is inherently determined by what they care about, and what they care about is determined by their needs, and again, their needs and what they hold to have value, which is different for every single people. Some peoples will value freedom, some people will value security, some will value order, some will value hierarchy, some will value egalitarianism, and etc., etc., etc. Now, please take advice from your own self. Don't judge all these people in the alt-right as Nazis. We accept the label of Nazis even though we're not, most of us in the American alt-right aren't National Socialists. We're for the most part just either white identitarians or white ethno-nationalists. We don't want socialism. We don't want a totalitarian state or everything. And we aren't coming to take away your freedoms. In Britain, you can have any form of government you want. As long as it doesn't threaten us, they'll be completely fine. Leave us in our own country to manage our own affairs. That's all we want and ask.
Just because someone looks different than you, or thinks differently than you, doesn't mean you should be afraid of them. It means you should be angry at them. How dare they be different? What? My way of life ain't good enough for them?